When do you think that God said, "Oy vey, what have I done"? At what point do you think that God realized that God made a mistake in creating the world? Yes, you heard me. On this first day of Rosh Hashanah, where we celebrate the creation of the world, we must acknowledge that there came a point where God looked out and felt that something had gone terribly wrong. If we look at the book of Genesis, right near the beginning, we read, "The Lord saw how great was man's wickedness on earth, and how every plan devised by his mind was nothing but evil all the time. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on earth, and God's heart was saddened. The Lord said, I will blot out from the earth the men whom I created, men with the beasts, the creeping things, and the birds of the sky, for I regret that I made them." Now we know that actually the majority of the animals were saved thanks to one righteous person, Noah. But God really had this profound moment of, what have I done, and can I make up for it? This is awful. Can you imagine working so hard for something only to look back and regret either that it was done or how it was now being enacted, and that was not your intention? I can imagine that this would be very painful. Two of the biggest movie hits this summer, Oppenheimer and Barbie, dealt with this exact question, amongst others, of course. Both films forced viewers to consider what happens when our inventions aren't used exactly as we intended. Now, of course, that could be a simplistic reading, certainly of Oppenheimer and the atomic bomb. We have to assume that it wasn't just theoretical for him, that he knew it was going to be used, but maybe he didn't think it was going to be used twice. Further, as Christopher Nolan said in an interview, but as with so much in science, the real knowledge comes with experimentation. This is the nature of science. You know, it moves forward, continually correcting itself. Science is not a process whereby you are able to sit down and perfectly map everything out in theoretical terms, and then that just becomes the future. It has to interact with the real world, and to a certain extent, Nolan said, our film is about the consequences of that. With Ruth Handler and Barbie, maybe her intention was to create a doll which could help young girls imagine that they could grow up to be anything they wanted, beyond just mothers for those who sought that. But what many women and men saw instead was a symbol of something they could never reach or didn't exist at all. And this has caused pain for women through the generations. So how do we understand this for today as we think about these stories as models where our actions don't match our intentions? Christopher Nolan continued in his interview, this is the thing. There are technological inventions being unleashed in the world. A lot of the researchers in AI talk about this as their Oppenheimer moment. And they're looking at historians and sort of saying, okay, what are the responsibilities of a researcher or a scientist bringing something into the world that may have unintended consequences? Rabbis have taken this up as well. As Rabbi Danny Nevins, the former dean of the JTS Rabbinical School, said, in my 2019 responsum for the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, I focused on topics related to AI-governed autonomous machine. Who is responsible for damage caused by a self-driving vehicle? How do we integrate Jewish ethical and legal norms into the operating system of these machines? What moral rules should govern autonomous weapons systems? Of course, neither Oppenheimer or Handler or Mattel intended to cause people pain, and neither did God. But nothing is parve or neutral in life. Everything we do has consequences. And as we think about these movies, to me, they were in many ways tshuva for the actions of the 20th century. What do I mean? During the second half of the 20th century, we thought that we had reached the pinnacle of civilization. From the depths of World War II, at least until the mid-60s, the US seemed to have emerged as the best. I know when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, I thought that as a kid. I didn't see anything wrong with the world around me. Now that shows the bubble that I grew up in. There were many reasons why I felt fine, and I feel pain that our teens and our kids today feel tremendous angst. And yet, they have much more honest, much more nuanced conversations and understandings of their communities, their countries, and our world. But teaching and engaging with this complexity doesn't mean that we have to destroy a world that was created. And it doesn't mean that we don't look at what was gained. But it does mean that just like the movies forced a reckoning, it is okay to have conversations that are hard. In fact, one of our new members, John Podhoretz, wrote in a review of Oppenheimer that it does a beautiful job posing the key question of his life, Oppenheimer's life, without answering it. In doing something transcendently great, did he do something evil? And I would add, if the impact of our actions are negative, how do we deal with that? And the inverse, what happens when something great emerges from someone whose personal actions are inherently evil? Can we separate the creation from the creator? How do we understand legacy? But these questions don't only apply to inventions, both the existential one, like the atomic bomb, and the seemingly frivolous, like Barbie. They also apply to our world. When I think about my two homelands, the United States and Israel, I am deeply proud and sometimes pained, two emotions that can exist simultaneously but require a thoughtful look. Like the movies themselves, which provide an opportunity for tshuva for the inventors, I believe that we are living at a time and through a moment where people are wondering, what were the intentions of the founders of our homelands? Where are we now, and where are we headed? While I know that we won't come to any policy agreements in this room about either country, what I can imagine is that for most, the notion of the Declaration of Independence in both countries feels compelling, even with the 2020 hindsight that the implementation has been a challenge. We can recognize that we haven't achieved yet the lofty goals outlined in either documents, so we can love an idea and be challenged with how it has been lived out. In the words in 1776, we said, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." And the words in 1948, "The state of Israel will be open for Jewish immigration and for the ingathering of the exiles. It will foster the development of the country for the benefit of all its inhabitants. It will be based on freedom and justice and peace, envisaged by the prophets of Israel. It will ensure complete equality for social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. It will guarantee freedom of conscience, language, education, and culture. It will safeguard the holy places of all religions, and it will be faithful to the principles of the Charter of the United Nations." If only words written in 1776 and 1948 were so easily executed. But just because the intention was what we hoped for and the reality isn't quite there yet, doesn't mean we don't keep engaging with the idea. We need to think it through. We know we're struggling, and we can be both pro the idea and challenged by the reality. A colleague and a friend of mine recently wrote, in the words of Rabbi Aaron Brousseau, "I never really understood what it meant to be pro-Israel. All I know is that what I feel right now is like going to bed worried your child is still breathing in their crib, waiting to get a letter from them while they're at camp, watching them back the car out of the driveway, saying goodbye to a spouse as they get on a plane, seeing your parent become more vulnerable as they age, waiting for your spouse's results from the doctor, letting go of the bike as your child pedals, worrying that the person they have given their heart to will break it. I don't know if that's pro-Israel, but that's how I feel. And quite frankly, it's no different in the US. One of the great TV shows that I liked in the 2010s, which aired in 2012, so this has nothing to do with any current or future or immediate past politicians, 2012, was the show Newsroom with the actor Jeff Daniels. During the pilot episode, he was on a panel, and a journalist was sitting between someone who was supposed to represent the left and someone who was supposed to represent the right. And they were each asked the question, why is America the greatest country on earth? How many of you know what's coming next? Okay. And after trying to give pithy answers, he was pushed back by the moderator and he said the following, "It's not the greatest country on earth. That's my answer. But it sure used to be. We stood up for what was right. We reached for the stars. We were all able to do things because we were informed. And the first step in solving any problem is recognizing there is one. America is not the greatest country in the world anymore, but it could be." Now, of course, his monologue had all of the elements of a TV moment, but it raised the question, not was America ever the greatest country on earth, because there will always be issues, but rather, is America fulfilling its ideals? So despite the critique of Israel and the US, they are mine, they are ours, and we deeply care about both. Like Israel, like America, like Barbie, like Oppenheimer, we need to ask, have we reached the potential of what we set out to? And just as important, are we doing something that we didn't mean to? And if the answers aren't what we want them to be, what do we do about it? What actions can we take to repair our past? The story is told that Alfred Nobel, a chemist, engineer, inventor, businessman, and philanthropist from Sweden, made numerous significant contributions to the field of science, holding a total of 355 patents during his lifetime. Dynamite was one of his most famous inventions, but unfortunately, the invention got him the title of Merchant of Death. Many saw his invention, which Alfred thought would end all wars, as a highly lethal product. When Alfred's brother died in 1888, a French newspaper accidentally published an obituary for Alfred and referred to him in the obituary as the Merchant of Death. As soon as Alfred read his own obituary, he decided to rewrite his will. Afraid to leave such a legacy behind, he decided to donate more than 90% of his life's earnings to create a symbol of respect and honor for the people who contributed to the betterment of mankind. The symbol was named after Alfred Nobel's name, the Nobel Prize. The prize had initially 5 categories, which were chemistry, physics, medicine or physiology, literature, and peace. And in 1969, economics was added as a category. How do we understand that why something was built and then something goes wrong, we have to adjust? We need to realize that we won't fix problems overnight, but we need to strive for goodness, even if we can't access perfection. And let us be honest, countries, families, individuals are far from perfect, but we try not to turn our backs on them. We speak and we share our opinions. We don't stand idly by when we see injustice. We, like Adam and Eve, or dare I say Barbie and Ken, could have stayed in Eden or Barbie land and not encountered the real world by tasting knowledge, understanding mortality. But once we did, once we took that bite, once we opened our eyes, it is incumbent upon us to repair what we see as broken, a step in the tshuva process. Now, we never know where our lives would take us when we first start out. Recently, somebody turned to me and said, you know, last week would have been my 51st wedding anniversary. But they had gotten divorced, and that person's life took them in a different direction. We don't always know when we set out where we will end up. We never know where our lives are going to take us, but we always have an opportunity to rebuild if they aren't where we want them to be. We see this with loss, with pain. We see this when we look around us. When I was a kid, I used to choose those read your own adventure books. If we chose one answer, we would go to one page, but another answer, a different page. Maybe the authors of this book knew the teaching in Pirkei Avot, I doubt it, that everything is foreseen, but freedom of choice is granted. Everything is foreseen, but freedom of choice is granted. At the end of the day, God might know where we will end up, but it isn't predestined. It is up to us to have ideas and opinions, and we need to reflect and make changes when we should. It isn't a sign of weakness. It is a sign of strength. When God created the world, God didn't expect to destroy it. When people get married, they don't expect to get divorced. But here was the thing. God didn't wipe it out completely. Close to complete, yes. Close enough that after the flood, God created a rainbow as a symbol of God's tshuva, that God will never go so far again. But we know that Noah found favor with the Lord. Even God had to start fresh. But God did so with God's creation, humanity. And it took time to rebuild. There's a lot of work to do, and God didn't give up. There was an understanding that to move forward, there needs to be a look back. This is tshuva. Tshuva is saying maybe things aren't as they should be, but it doesn't mean that they will be this way forever. Tshuva is saying that maybe I was wrong, but I can be right in the future. Tshuva is saying I intended to be right, but the results were wrong. Maybe it was on purpose. Maybe we really meant to hurt someone. Maybe it was by accident. We said something that we didn't even realize what we said. Maybe it was to ourselves where we took that fork in the road that wasn't the right one at that moment. Tshuva is a return, a retracing of steps to be able to make a different choice next year or repair the ones we made this past year. Maya Angelou was interviewed by Oprah on her 70th birthday. Oprah asked her what she thought of growing older. And there on television, she said it was exciting. She said, I've learned that no matter what happens or how mad life seems today, it does go on and it will be better tomorrow. She said, I've learned that you can tell a lot about a person by the way he or she handles three things: a rainy day, lost luggage, and tangled Christmas lights. She said that she has learned that making a living is not the same as making a life, and that life sometimes gives you a second chance. During these 10 days of tshuva, we should think about the hard acts of tshuva, the hard acts of making change in our lives to make sure that we are living the life the way we want it to be lived. Tshuva is one of the greatest gifts that God has given us, especially knowing that there will be questions at the end of our life that we will need to answer. So why is tshuva important? Because we can write a new answer now, before the end of our life. We don't need to only depend on what we did, but rather what we have the potential to do, even when things are hard. So how do we do that this year? Reach out, talk to your people, your loved ones, your friends, your colleagues, the people you know, maybe the people you don't know so well. Rabbi Shammai Cantor, a conservative rabbi, told this story that he was once bicycling on the first day of summer, and he passed a church bulletin board that carried the message, "If you're headed in the wrong direction, God allows U-turns." God allows U-turns. He writes, this is a perfectly good translation for our term tshuva, which means turning around. It's why in the Unatana Tokef, when we pray about a good life, the first thing we mention is tshuva, the ability to recognize that if we've gone off course, we have the courage to make that U-turn and head in the right direction again. And of course, we know that sometimes we are disappointed, even if it isn't our fault. I share the following, a love letter to the world that may or may not deserve it. It was written by Rabbi Harold Kushner, one of the great theologians of the 20th and 21st centuries, who passed away just a few months ago. Dear world, we've been through a lot together over the past 8 decades. You and I, marriages, births, deaths, fulfillments and disappointments, war and peace, good times and hard times. There were days that you were more generous to me than I could have ever possibly deserved, and there were days that you cheated me out of things I felt entitled to. There were days when you looked so achingly beautiful that I could hardly believe you were mine, and there were days when you broke my heart and reduced me to tears. But with it all, I choose to love you, world. I love you, whether you deserve it or not. And how does one measure that? I love you in part because you are the only world that I have. I love you because I like who I am better when I do. But mostly I love you because loving you makes it easier for me to be grateful for today and hopeful for tomorrow. Love does that. Faithfully yours, Harold Kushner. There will be people, there will be ideas, there will be actions, there will be moments that have disappointed us in the past, and if we are honest with ourselves, we might have been the pain, the cause of the pain as well for others. But what we learn from God, what we learn from the movies of the summer, what we learn from the late Rabbi Kushner, is that seeing where things went wrong doesn't mean we have to completely start over. But it means listening to one another, listening to ourselves, figuring out how we will live in this world that makes it the world worth celebrating on this day of Rosh Hashanah, on this day of creation, because we don't give up on the world and we don't give up on ourselves, because even in their imperfections, both are worthy of existence. Shana Tova.